welcome again to On the Record and to Mark Brooks. Mark's down there in the south of England, and you've got yourself into domestic abuse from a man point of view. Now, we don't hear of much of this, Mark, right? Honestly, it's usually the ladies that are complaining, I'm in an abusive situation. Is it because the men are a bit reticent about being called weak or not man enough, but it's active, and I'm afraid it's all too common.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're finding is that more and more men are coming forward. But if we look at the statistics around men who are victims of domestic abuse, is about 1 in 5 men will be a victim of domestic abuse at some time in their life,
God.
either from a partner or the official definition could be from another adult in their household. So you sometimes, a son who an adult son who's committing abuse against their adult dads in the household, that counts too. But primarily it's from a partner or ex-partner. And when you look at the figures for every three female victims of domestic abuse, there will be two male victims as well. So the figures are a lot closer than people think when it comes to women and men.
Now, what kicks this off? Is it because of abuse in their own lives that people carry this on and abuse their partners?
Not always, but certainly if you've had and it's not always abuse from their upbringing, but if you've had what's called the technical term is an ACE, which is adverse childhood experiences. If you don't know what normal looks like when you're growing up, then that can obviously come through in terms of not only your behavior, but also actually your willingness to actually take the abuse when you're older, because you don't know what a normal relationship between, say, two parents or mum and dad or mum and stepdad, whatever, actually look like. So there are risk issues there, and I think for men, building on the previous question, you see, for men and women, that there is a lot of similarities about the abuse that they have, but there's nuances with regard to both women and men. And for men, the kind of nuances are around this point that you mentioned about shame and embarrassment, men fearing that they won't be believed. It really undermines their sense of what it means to be a man. And we get men calling our helpline, for example, who are, have fought wars, have been in Afghanistan or Iraq, for example, and, are big guys, trained killers in many respects. But when they go home, they've had a partner who's 5'5", 5'6", a female partner who's been committing them physical and emotional and psychological abuse against them. So for a lot of men, it's kind of what will this look like to the outside world? So you've got all of that internalized shame and embarrassment, and undermining their sense of what it means to be a man. But on top of that, you've got their fear of what it looks like to the outside world. How could I possibly be a victim of domestic abuse? Look at the size of me, look at the size of her. Nobody will believe me.
Yeah, that's important. I was going to say, are we talking about a rather um, overweight lady that's definitely a bit aggressive and can physically turn it on? And you look at what you said and said, well, 5'9", 10 stone lady, she's not going to cope physically. Is there some link up here? Does it depend on your physical presence?
No, no, it doesn't actually. It doesn't. And what we do find, it's a nuanced difference, is that so when a man wants to harm a woman in a relationship, he will tend to use his like fists, for example. Whereas a woman, if she wants to harm a man she's in a relationship, will tend to use a weapon. So they would tend to use a knife. They would tend to use things like kettles, irons, other kind of tools. There was one case I remember dealing with where a man was being poisoned, so his ex-wife was putting antifreeze in his food, and he really liked hot curries, so she was masking the antifreeze by making hot curries, so he was eating them, and like he then, yeah, exactly. He went blind in the end, and the
Oh,
thing is, she went to prison, he went blind, and they had a child. So, you know, so it isn't just that the suffering that he's gone through and will always have gone through is the fact that he's got a child to bring up with the mum in prison. So a lot of the time, the physicalities, use of weapons or other tactics to commit the abuse, which again slightly different from a man because man's physically bigger. He can
yeah.
physically harm somebody directly.
Mm. I'm thinking about this, and the modern term, of course, dating back to that black and white film, is gaslighting, psychological, and a woman can be just as good as a man at that, certainly. And I'm thinking also about the breakup of families, particularly relevant to GB. I don't know why. And it all goes together. Why can't people, I was going to say, be normal? Perhaps it's normal behavior these days. They see it on films, they see it in society, and it spills over.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we don't know. It's only, I'd say, last 20, 30 years, mainly led by, the female sector or feminist sector have really taken this on. And then, in the last 10 years, everybody's views have been, wide, broadened to think about men and also people in same-sex relationships as well. So the kind of lens has been broadened. But who knows whether it's a new phenomenon because it will have been happening for years and years before. But for women, they never came forward. I mean, especially if you look, but back in the day, in inverted commas, women couldn't even open their have a bank account until the mid 70s unless a man signed the form. So you don't know what was going on behind closed doors, either from women controlling men or from men controlling women in the 70s, 60s, 50s. So you say it's a new phenomenon. We don't know whether it is or not. And the fact that the feminist campaigners started to talk about it in the mid 70s onwards would suggest to me that it'd been going on for decades before. It's just that actually people are far more aware of it and recognise it's completely wrong than perhaps they did before.
Got a lot of immigration in the United Kingdom at the moment. Do you
Yeah.
notice any factor again in this that it's always said, for instance, that from the Islamic point of view, there is a lot of control by the man over the woman. But does it work the other way around as well?
Well, I think is I think more broadly what we found speaking to people from obviously the wide range of cultures, there can be aspects where if there's a very patriarchal culture or um, uh, group, then actually it's far harder for a man to come forward because I talked about the stigma and embarrassment and shame, for example. So if you're in a heavily more, a very patriarchal culture where the man is meant to be like the dominant figure in control of everything. If you are then a victim of domestic abuse within that culture, then actually the barriers are far, far deeper because you have to jump a bigger hurdle to find the bravery and the confidence to come forward, and also the understanding that you will be taken seriously. So can be additional stigma barriers the more patriarchal a society is. So certainly there are, there are issues in that, and and that will cause problems for some men. You see that in some of some of the issues, especially if you're a gay man. For example, that can be more difficult, and certainly we've seen in some instances where if you're in a gay relationship and your immigration status or your religious background can be used as extra tools by your male partner to say, well, if you leave the relationship, think about the cultural and community stigma you have, not just because you're in an abusive relationship but also because you're gay. So there are aspects around patriarchal society or cultures.
What about the gay society? You've mentioned this, and
Mm.
are there more or less abusers there?
Well, the thing is, I mean, I think the statistics show that if you're in a gay relationship, a man or a woman, that you are more likely to be a victim of domestic abuse than if you're in a heterosexual relationship. And there's a lack of research actually looking at that community in general, but also looking at why those figures are higher than if you're in a heterosexual relationship. So they're the figures, and they've been the figures for the last 15, 20 years. But the understanding about why that is less understood, and there needs to be far more work in that area to try and get to the bottom of that. But
Uh,
in terms of overall numbers, of course, there's far less people who are in gay relationships than those in heterosexual relationships. So we estimate broadly that for men, about if you're in an abusive relationship, 9 in 10 of those relationships will be heterosexual. About 10%, 1 in 10 will be in a same-sex relationship.
How did you get involved in all this, Mark? I mean, we find people flying the flag very bravely, like you do, have either been abused themselves or there's another way in. What happened to you in the past to get you into this?
Yeah, well, it was the latter actually. So I used to be a local elected councillor, and when I was an elected councillor, there was a chap who was one of my constituents, if you like, who was living in a council flat with his two kids, and he had an abusive partner. She had a police caution, so it was proven that she was harming him, and this is 30 years ago, roughly now. Um, and basically, she he came to me to try and get rehoused because the council at the time wouldn't take him seriously because he was a man. And this is a long time ago, as I mentioned. And so that I then contacted council, got him and his two children rehoused somewhere away from his partner. And that kind of like piqued my interest that when I stopped being a counsellor and I wanted to do some voluntary work, and do some campaigning work. So it wasn't just voluntary work. I wanted to look at what I could do to help some campaigns. I found this charity was already in existence. I'd only been going around 5 years, Mankind initiative, and therefore I decided to help with their campaigning. And I've been the chair for some while now, and that's how I got into the subject. I'm always interested in making a difference, especially in areas where nobody's dealing or challenging or talking about those issues. So it isn't just making a difference. I'm always inquisitive about areas where nobody else is talking about, because I feel I can make a bigger difference in that than perhaps just volunteering for a normal mainstream charity.
There is a trick in this, isn't there? If anybody wants to report to the authorities, in that don't go to the council, go to an individual councillor. Is that correct?
No, I didn't know. I think that was a one-off. I think that was just I think that was that was a one-off. Partly actually, Rodney, because the domestic abuse sector has changed so much in that 30 years. So 30 years ago, when that chap come to me, there wasn't really any domestic abuse services in local communities available for men, and there wasn't really much for women. But what's then happened is that over the last 30 years is that every local council has to commission a domestic abuse service to support their local community. And that service has to also support male victims. So I would always recommend that if you need support, uh, try and get a trusted friend, family member, work colleague on board as well to help you, to be your kind of right hand person. But go to those local council services who will support male victims. And of course, if you're in immediate danger, you must call the police as well. And the police response is like far, far better now than it was then because, I mean, the police did believe the male then because obviously his ex got a caution, but the police will take you seriously, especially in even more so if you've got evidence. So no, don't go to your local councillor. You can, of course, but your first thought is, I need to go to my local council domestic abuse service.
Now, thinking about this a little deeper, we've got a family involved here and often children. There's no such thing as an average home. But
Mm.
let's assume you've got a situation, man, woman, two children, one boy, one girl. Now, it's often weaponized, the children, isn't it, in all this? Uh, is it the mum that gets the children as the abuser on her side and turns them against father?
Well, that does happen. It's called parental alienation, or
Mm,
uh, a lot of people now, which we're happy to use, is alienating behaviours as well. So it's basically where one parent turns the children irrationally turns the children against the other parent to try as a tool of control and psychological abuse on the other parent. And it does happen. Mothers use that against fathers. Also, fathers will use that against mothers, and um, we see that all the time. Especially if they're getting acrimonious splits and use of family courts as well, but also we see that as a tool of economic abuse. So, one parent is forced to keep going back to the family courts to maintain a relationship that racks up legal fees, for example. So, as well as the psychological abuse, there's also the economic abuse, and we continue to see that. We also see that when keeping people in relationships. So we see that with mothers, because I mean, because obviously we're a male service, but we see that with mothers saying to men, if you leave, you'll never see your kids again.
yeah.
So basically, the man stays in the relationship because he doesn't want that risk. And of course, obviously, a man doesn't want to also leave a household and leave his kids behind somebody who's a narcissistic abuser. So because obviously, man, and to be fair, a woman's first instinct is always to protect the children. So a man doesn't want to leave and then leave his kids with somebody who's violent.
I mean, in a simple situation, not that there is any, what you're doing, staying with her, clear off, assuming there's no children involved. I mean, is it as simple as that in many cases?
It's not as simple as that. Because of three or four things. It's easy if you're younger in some respects, but there's three key magnets that keep men and women actually in abusive relationships: mortgage, children, and marriage. and also love as well. And what we find with a lot, so they're keeping people in. So, as you said, people without children. So it'd be mortgages, marriage, and also love. And what we find with men, especially because if you think about some of the things around masculinity, a real key thing for men is to be of service and to support the family through thick and thin. And the thing about service is that what we find is that a lot of men will actually, if they're in an abusive relationship, they won't think of themselves first. They'll think of the perpetrator. We know from research, a lot of men's first instinct is not about what support they need, it's what support their perpetrator needs. Do they need anger management classes? Do they need to help to stop drinking, for example? And so men will put their female abusive partner first very often because that's just for many men that's their worldview, to be of service to others, and love will drive that.
Strange, isn't it? It's rumoured on the block that if you're reporting this to the police, you will often find a WPC, a woman police officer, a bit more sympathetic.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, we have, and it's anecdotally, but certainly from reports we've had, the in terms of the helpline, but also speaking to the police. Yeah, the female police officers are far more sympathetic, or can be more sympathetic than male officers. Not always, but some are. And certainly we've had from male police officers, it's like, well, mate, you should just leave her, grow a pair, get a grip on your woman, all of this, quite difficult stereotypes, but far more empathy from women, partly because a lot of women probably understand domestic abuse more because they've been through it, more have been through it, or they know more their female friends, family members who've been through it. But also, speaking to some of them, they just understand how abusive some women can be because they've been around them, in their friend circle and work circle, been at school, wherever, and they better understand that some women can be violent and controlling. And I remember going on a being in a room, and I was the only guy in the room, and we were talking about domestic abuse, and they were asking me about female domestic abuse. And I remember a woman said to me, and this is what she said. So, she said, girls, I mean, they're all in their 30s, 40s. So said, I'm putting inverted commas, not me saying this. She looked around and said, girls, we all know that there are abusive, violent women. We met them when we were at school. They were the bullies in the playground, who were physically bullying other women. Don't think they changed when they became adults. So women have seen that, so that's why they're more understanding around men, because that they've seen it when it comes to females on a wider sense as well. And I've been doing a lot of work around education policy and things like that. I've got this line that nobody fights harder for sons than mums. So basically, there will be some of that, just some of that instinctive
Mm.
um, feelings from many WPCs. So yeah, often in the police force, the biggest advocates are female police officers, and more power to their elbow.
Indeed. In a situation that is very common, is there, and this is not a very scientific statement, but you'll understand it, is there an inherent weakness in the average male that gets taken advantage of by the woman?
Not really. I mean, uh, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, where the issue is that the perpetrator wants to have full power and control over their partner. So that applies for male perpetrators as well as female perpetrators. It's obviously harder for a, a, a woman to exert control if their partner is a very strong, domineering man. So if you're, and most men aren't like that. So if you're a normal guy, it's probably easier because you're not an alpha male. So it's harder for women to control alpha men. But if you're a normal guy, then it will be easier. You probably find so it probably will be easier. But there isn't. I mean, we have men who call us who are GPs, politicians, police officers, uh, boardroom CEOs, etc., as well as men who are, unemployed, self-employed, working, the trades, for example, working, normal jobs. So we get men calling us from all of the different demographics, and in terms of employment, class, race, and place. So there's no real stereotype, I would say. And I think it's important for us not to think of that, because if we do think of things about the stereotype type of man, it means we might miss some men who do need our help.
I have heard that the place not to be is the northeast of England, and you happen to be a builder or active outside. The number of suicides because of this is very high.
Well, we're doing research on some links between suicide and occupation and domestic abuse, but I don't think su- suicide in the northeast is twice as much as it is in the south of England. And also people who work in construction and logistics, and if you like, blue collar roles, for want of a better phrase, far more likely to die by suicide than men who work in white collar office roles. The link with domestic abuse hasn't really been made in terms of domestic abuse and where you live and where you work and suicide. So there's certainly a link between where you live and where you work and suicide, but not necessarily the domestic abuse. However, we do know from, again, research that 1 in 4 suicides and homicides, which are linked homicides and homicide suicides, about a quarter of those are featuring men. We don't know whether it's more, because for a lot of men, they may die by suicide. They may be a victim of domestic abuse and nobody knows that. And that's what some of the research that we'll be looking at, is to try and unpick that, try and find out more.
This is not a small issue. It's been calculated that 1.5 million men in the United Kingdom have suffered or are suffering abuse. That's colossal.
Oh, absolutely, and that's per year. So overall, it's about 5 million men in total. So 1 in 5 men will be a victim of domestic abuse at some time in their life, and it's 1.5 million a year. Government figures, official figures, yeah, it's a huge number. Um, and present government in the UK has got a commitment to reduce that by half, so over 10 years. So the key to success is for that to be going down to 750,000. That's still 750,000 too many, of course, but yeah, it's a staggering amount, I have to say. The majority of that is partner abuse from partners or ex-partners.
Mm.
So that shows you the scale. For women, the figures are 2.3 million per year. So if you look at that, 2.3 million women per year, 1.5 million men. So it's a staggering amount. And when you look at it, it's nearly 4 million people. But the issue is that nearly all of the talk around domestic abuse is about the 2.3 million women, and not about the 2.3 million women and the 1.5 million men. So when we're talking about domestic abuse, and the politicians, the government, local councils and police, nearly all of their focus is on the 2.3 million women, and the men get missed out. Part of our work is to make sure that the discussion isn't just about women, it's about women and men. It's not about women or men, it's about women and men. And that's where we've got to get to. We need far more attention and focus and talking about those men who are victims because not enough is being talked about them.
Yeah, a situation here again is that you can do anything with stats, with data. And for example, farmers seem to attract a lot of suicides for whatever reason. But has anybody tumbled? Oh, there might be abuse, especially in the farming situation between husband and wife. It might be a factor that's not been discovered, and many other employments.
Yeah, absolutely. Rural domestic abuse is one of those blind spots when it comes to domestic abuse. It also includes men who are disabled as well, as well. They're kind of blind spots, but there is research and there is a recognition that these are blind spots. So it isn't. We've got to a situation where there is now recognition of male victims, nowhere near enough. And so now, over the next 10 years, it's really about not just increasing that recognition and support, but also, if you like, colouring in or filling in the gaps where there are issues where we don't know enough about the domestic abuse that's going on. That includes suicide in total, not just about suicide in certain communities.
Where can men go? Is there a refuge? Is it the local railway arch, or can you get housed and lodged to escape the heat?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we found in the last 10 years has been a big increase in the amount of the technical term safe accommodation for male victims. So that includes refuges, but it might be a flat, or it might be rooms somewhere. Where you are then given proactive support to support male victims. A roof over your head, but also support as well, even more so if you've got children. So there's been a big increase in that over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, it wasn't really there, but it is now. And I think that's been a big improvement. But as I said, there is a service for men in every part of the United Kingdom where men live. So what tends to happen is that if a man needs support for housing, he will go to that local domestic abuse support and they will then sort it out for them. They are covered by laws around homelessness. So if you are a man at risk of homelessness due to domestic abuse, local councils have a legal duty to find you somewhere safe to live.
I'm going to finally ask you a question that I don't know whether it's a bit naive. Let's talk about healings, reparations, getting the couple back on a normal, domestic, non-abusive uh, situation. Does it ever happen that?
I mean, it can happen through either mediation or if the perpetrator is getting proactive support so they understand their behaviors and how they're wrong. So so that can happen and does happen, and we know of instances where that happens. But our primary objective when men call us is to make sure that them and their children are safe. And if that means them leaving a relationship and taking their children with them, that often is the by far the best route out. If you're in an abusing situation, you need to get out of that situation.
I mean, in simplistic terms, do you ever get occasion to talk to the woman in dealing with trying to heal the situation and say, do you realize what you're doing?
We don't because we run a helpline, so we don't speak to the person committing that abuse. but those local community services may well be having conversations. And of course, a lot of those men will be seeking, will be going through the criminal justice system. So they will have reported the abuse to the police. And it may well be that social workers and others will then get involved in trying to help the woman who's committing that abuse, even more so if there's some form of criminal sanction as well. So if there's molestation, non-molestation orders, and all of that sort of thing, then perpetrators will be signposted to professional help, including female perpetrators.
Where do you get your money from, Mark, to get this going?
um, the public. So our helpline and our website, which is got lots of information is purely funded by the public. So there's people making donations to us. There's people doing fundraising events to us. Sometimes some companies sponsor things for us, like a website or a newsletter or whatever. So it's purely philanthropic donations from the public or companies.
Okay, we're going to go out on that and we're going to give what we call in the business a slate to A, get in touch with you if you're in an abusive situation, and B, how you can donate. Thank you so much, Mark.
Absolutely. My pleasure and honor, Rodney. Thank you very much.